So, I'd like to start with, this was one of the poems I wrote at the month long that I've been reading lately. It's interesting, I get to like my own stuff. It's called The World Calling, from a Well Gone Dry. From this silence so well constructed, I wander off into tomorrow, bending like a willow, trying to touch a world unhatched. This impossible of my imagination. I am the intimacy of faith. I am the grandeur of my loneliness. I am the worthiness, that which is kept buried beneath the wounds of my stories. Sometimes everything has to be studied, knowing somehow the sitting here not enough. This knowing the fierce walking, like pilgrims through the darkness. Knowing we've traveled inside everyone. Feeling the grief, the joys. I want to know no more traveling on the wings of fear and hope, but sit by the fire of living, no longer dying to what could have been or even what will be, but finding my place in the things that are, some mystery presented, some grace, some bit of mercy miraculously lived. So let this listening, somewhere beneath the granite shelves of the earth, where the sweet waters lie in wait, to be tapped to give life back to itself. This basic goodness, this first step home, gives you back to yourself, the heart flowing from each encounter, a mind pliable, moving like the sweet stream from the deep down listening. I am awake, as the world calls in its pungent need to change me. I move into it with it. I'm into it and with it. So tonight, I have to remember all these buttons tonight. Tonight I'd like to work with what is known as the three characteristics and the three subtle characteristics. And we all sort of know what the routine here of the three characteristics. But they're always, they are the basis of truth. That whenever we look and we keep looking and we keep recognizing this is a process of kind of studying experience. And over again, there is the intellectual knowledge of these characteristics, that there is basically, impermanence exists, and that there is this thing called dukkha, suffering, which I spoke of the other night, we'll keep speaking of, and probably will always speak of. And then there is this really non-conceptual knowing that is referred to as Anata, or non-self. And that these are all, in essence, the importance of them being the characteristics is that they are something that have a tremendous amount of, they seem so simple on the surface, but they go as deep as you can go. Okay. There are three other levels where I spend a little more time on this evening, which have to do with, they're called the subtle characteristics. And these subtle characteristics actually come out of the three fundamental ones, which are somewhat more obvious, but they take a little bit of a more absolute look at things. And the first one is that actually the impermanence turns into, it's the word sunyata, and it is really translated as empty or emptiness. So that the impermanence, when it's actually seen at this flow is seen at such a deep level, has no consistency, basically, no core. And then, but to see it in that way is somewhat nihilistic. On the other side of that, you have the suffering, in the sense of dukkha, and that it, what lies in it, deep in the recognition of it, is it's a word tatat, which translates as suchness, and which is a beautiful word, the suchness of things. It's not saying no to things, it's saying this is what's here. It is suchness, and there's a kind of a saying yes to life. And then the third of these, when you look at the word Anata, which says that we can see the constructs and recognize we can't find anything in the constructs. That's really Anata. You can't find anything in the constructs. Then when you look deeper than that, then there's a word atamayata, which translates as not there with the object. Okay, not there with the object. So the mind then is no longer in a dualistic state, but actually is just, in essence, kind of present with the material. So it no longer even sees that the self is not just about some kind of comparison recognition. There isn't even any, in essence, any separateness whatsoever. So I'll start here. That just sort of gives you the overview picture, and then we'll just mess with these a little, see what a little riff off of them, I think it's called. And gosh, impermanence. I can say that probably the most obvious experience of sitting meditation, the most presentable material is all based on impermanence. So the mind itself is constructed in a way that it takes material and it solidifies it so it can, I guess, get what it needs, keep away what it doesn't want, and solidify the material so it feels safe. So we're constantly, with our perception, we perceive what's here, and then we create these mental formations which take and solidify everything around us. And we sort of take that and categorize it in some way. I don't know how it does it, but it does. And then it goes, oh, this is solid and real and safe, right? And then we can relax, right? Supposedly. But this is the kind of the surface of things, is how we operate, in the psychological world. Now, when we come to meditation, the whole idea of it first is to stabilize the mind. So the idea, I just remember I was living in Paris, and this was in the 60s before I came to the States, and I read this book by, what's his name? Morning Sadhu Baba, something like that. And it was on concentration. And I remember, oh, great. So I got this candle and I put it in the, and I thought I'd get really high off of this one. That's all I care about anyway. So, And it was my introduction to it, kind of staring into this candle. But what my mind was trying to do was doing the same thing, was freeze it and stabilize it. You know. And so actually, in that way, I thought, well, that, you know, and they call them kasana practices in the Theravada tradition, where you can take a stone, take a candle, you can take any of the earth elements, water, fire, and you basically you try to absorb yourself into the object. You know, and it's a kind of primal thing. And then also the use of mantra is a tradition of taking anything that one can collect in oneself around. You know. Now, in the tradition, it's so interesting that instead of, actually the kasanas are used later for absorptions. But what's true is that the Buddha took one phenomenal object and he said, use your breath. And he said, here's an object that is universal. It goes to no religion, has no, you know, sound stuff, nothing, you know, from anything like mantras do. So it's a universal object. It's a true object. And it is a moving object. You know, and the real secret is a moving object. So we began to try to stabilize our attention on a moving object. Now that means that there's actually, he's not just giving a concentration object, he's giving a wisdom object, because it begins to bring to the foreground this first characteristic of impermanence. Because you begin to see that, okay, there's no way that I can hold this in some way. There's actually, I'm trying to rest my attention on a moving object. And so the teaching immediately begins when you realize, whoops, 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 where was that breath? Whoops, you know, what's he talking about? You know, and all it is the study. Not so much of putting the mind, I mean, it's a nice idea, and it does happen, but the insight is based on the awareness of the flux. So you begin to realize, oh, this is a flux, this is a flow, this is not solid objects. Then you're asked, okay, well, that's good, so you're starting to get the breath a little bit, then allow yourself to experience the body. And it's interesting, some of the, one of the great teachers of Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Mun, in one of his, one of the quotes I hold most dear, he says, whatever you do, don't abandon the body. You know? And, you know, we all kind of think of this thing of kind of transcendent ideals, of somehow getting out of here. But what he's saying, and this was in such an awakened man, that he was actually very hard to pin down, the way many of those types were. And they said he never stayed in one place very long, and you know, if you went in search of him, it was not easy to find, because he was kind of many kind of jungle dweller, and didn't like, he didn't stay in monasteries. You know, but they say that, you know, Ajahn Chah only spent 3 days with him in his life and became his teacher. You know, and that in that 3 days, it turned his mind. You know, he said he went from an experience of knowing the absolute from a relative place, so always from this relative reality, that it took and turned his mind around, so he was looking from the absolute at the relative. And that happened in 3 days with this man. You know. And he'd been a monk for 20 years, but that turned his mind around. Ajahn Mun was very clear. It's just simply that this is what's happening here. Is, he said, in his standing, sitting, walking, lying down, whatever you do, don't abandon it. Why? Simply because this is where these characteristics, this is where the truth is actually revealed over and over again. You can never, the body is very much like a stream, a river that's flowing by in relative to time. And the mind can take and fix and hold things in time. It has concepts that actually can keep for eons. But the body can't have that. All it is a momentary experience of an impermanent flow. So every time we make the connection, either with the breath or the body, there is the awareness of that impermanence. It becomes something that's revealing something about a characteristic of the truth, of what's happening, of where we are, who we are, how it works, And so the more we practice, actually the more the mind, instead of fixing on things, and it trains itself to be with the breath and the body, it actually begins to not believe its thoughts as so much. That's what we're trying to do in some way, is actually break down that tenacity or that grasping that says, what I'm thinking is what is true. What I am thinking is what is true. Instead of saying, this is just, I connect with my body, I see this is just a flow, and I can get that I'm holding this, but it's not the whole show. This is not the whole show. The whole show is this flux or flow that's going on. And so can I allow that to inform the construct of my experience? So we actually are loosening the construct through our awareness of breath, body. And we're actually doing that all the time here. And it's actually breaking down some of the habit, somewhat, of that identification process and the solidifying of the thoughts and the thinking. They say in the Progress of Insight, one of the things that happens, one of the fundamental insights here, is that we have a moment, kind of like awakening moment of impermanence. As we get it, so it's not just part of our awareness, but it's actually that the mind and the body make the connection to it. And they consider it sometimes it's almost like considered like an awakening, because we get that insight. And we're all actually in process through this particular process of sitting and walking and trying to create a continuity of mindfulness and awareness and kind of a collecting of the mind. That is a primary insight. That you not only recognize it in the mind, but it's actually something that is what is insight is when the mind and body and the heart line up and they get the connection. And then it's not just a mental construct or concept. It's something that you begin then to know, in a sense, kind of, I guess the word intuition, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but something deep enough where it becomes more of a core of understanding than the concept of it, and therefore it influences your thinking process. And I feel like, I could go on and on and on and on about this because it's so primary to the practice itself. And it's something that you don't just, and the thing is, he calls them the characteristics because they're not something that, there is just one insight. It is actually, there is multiple insights into it that will keep happening to you as you go along here. That's just the kind of nature of it, you know, because it is primary, you know, and these are truths. You know. The second one, which I've talked somewhat about, is this idea.
Is that it? Are they absolute?
Excuse me?
Are they absolute?
Absolute?
I mean, they're truths, so are they absolute?
I don't like the word absolute, you know.
Well, I mean,
in the
as
sense that
opposed to relative?
they are, you know, I like just the word truth, because we'll move into, they work with the relative in the sense of impermanent experience, right? This is, in a sense, it can go from the most relative world to the deepest truth. Okay? So is that absolute? I just don't like the word so much. Because we can take it into another level when we get there, in that sense. So let's just leave it as something that we can go down through. And so we'll always be kind of going through levels of this. You know, in the same way, then the second one is the word dukkha, which is the suffering. And the suffering goes up and down, you know. At a very deep level, when we kind of get the first, it is the experience of it, and then there's the causation of it, of the suffering. And so we begin to see how the grasping, you know, on so many levels, informs us. So these are truths that are you know, sometimes unbearable. You know, the impermanence can be unbearable. You know, you can be so in this practice. Sometimes people come to a place in the progress of insight where they're sitting, and it feels like there's no ground. Everything is in flux. Everything's in motion, and you actually have, similar to like a panic attack. You go into fear because there's nothing that can be, you know, that has any solidity to it whatsoever. You know, and that happens. That's, you know, that's, you know, we're not here. This is a threat to who you think you are, ultimately. Okay? So I'm not going to be a nice guy about this. It's not. That is, you know, you want to get awakened? Well, guess what? You know, at some point, everything that you have constructed will be threatened on some level. And if it's that about the fact that everything is, you know, that my mind keeps constructing this solidness, but then suddenly you work this practice to a point where that doesn't exist. You are just part of a molecular flow that has no ground whatsoever. In the same way, you come to the suffering and you realize that the Buddha said, no, this is the first noble truth. So this means it's going to take you down. I mean down. Right? And the more sensitive and clear you get, you see that just the friction itself, the sensitivity to the kind of the molecules of light kind of moving against each other, you know, that we feel so deeply the truth of grasping and the truth of letting go. Both. You know. And the deeper you go, the more the grasping of letting go has to be there because the sensitivity increases. And so the more sensitive you are, the more you recognize that, you know, sometimes even in breathing, the sensitivity can be so great that one feels the the pain of friction, and you could say almost the pain of life. And so there has to be, what it's teaching you, the dukkha is actually teaching you the letting go. The impermanence is teaching you the flow. Right? This is just the flow. And the dukkha is teaching you let go. And then there's this word anatta. Translated as no self. Always a challenging concept in sort of Buddhist dialectics. Okay, so what are we going to do with this one? Well, actually, intellectually, you can't do this. Sorry. That's the one thing you can't do. You can use your intellect for a lot of things, but you can't use it for this. Yeah. And why? Because every time I think about it, I got in the way. So how can I understand it if I'm always in the way? So, but it's happening all the time, and it's sometimes it's as simple as when we suffer, which forces us to let go, and we're in the letting go, and that we recognize the flow, and we look for who's it happening to, who is this, and we look for it. We don't find anything, and then we begin to see that it's just simply a part of a construct. We made it up, and we make it up so that somehow we separate the world out. Not that that's good or bad. It's just what we do. But what I find is there's so many moments. Actually, I think sometimes there's more moments where the cow is just walking by, and we're just in amazement, and nothing more. It's just like life is living itself, and I'm present for it, and I'm awake to it, and I'm not doing anything with it. It happens a lot, but it's just not noticeable because we've put so much emphasis. Like all of our charge and attention is on the I, So there's no mirror for it because we can't see it, So we're actually trying to look at something that's not seeable, right? Because all we see is the I, the me, the mind, So, we don't get anywhere with this one. Okay, there's nowhere to go with it. Just to know that there are moments when you're out of the way, and there is just the flux and the flow, and that if there's not any grasping, and there's not any attachment to things, then there's not anybody doing anything there. It's okay. It's fine.
Can't you just explain it by teachings on dependent origination?
Mm-hmm. I'll do that.
That's the way to explain the not-self, right?
Yes, it's an impersonal process that's going on that's dependent on a series of things that are happening. And last night, before you go to codependent rising, dependent rising, we also have to go back to the what are called the 5 aggregates, which I understand in chemistry is okay. But actually another way of talking about them is the 5 streams. And the 5 streams are actually what the Buddha said, this is what you are. You are form, you are feeling, you have perception, you have mental formations, and you have consciousness or awareness, whichever word you want to use there. That's all he said there was. He stopped right there. So in the mental formations, in the conceptual that we have created in that, this I or me or mine. But it's just a mental formation. And part of the job of the sitting is to see into the impermanence, to see the flow. The next is actually, or they're not linear in any fashion. Then you have to begin to understand the whole process of how suffering happens, and that there's also letting go that happens due to it. You can't, it's going to happen, whatever. It's part of nature that you will let go. And that the self was a constructed, codependent mental formation that had no substance behind it. There was no solid thing. And he was fairly emphatic about that because at the time, and this is again just going back to what was true in those at that time, was in the kind of Brahmanistic view that there was the whole idea of something solid, and what we use the word soul, or some idea of a something that could move from life to life, something that was actually quite solid and identifiable. They use sometimes the size of a sesame seed or whatever. But the Buddha said, no, I don't think so. All I see is arising and passing away. And that includes that any concept of myself is simply a concept that arises due to the mental formation. That's an entity. It's okay. But it's not actually who I am. It's something I'm manufacturing. But if it means it's something I'm manufacturing, guess what? This is really cool. Is if you're manufacturing it, that the life force you have and all the karma you have is changeable. So you could be a real rogue and very quickly get enlightened because you have the flexibility, the actual possibility of changing. Otherwise, he said there would be no spiritual life if we couldn't change the flow of things. And part of the identity thing, it would be a lot more work with that. But if it's not, then there's actually more possibilities. If that makes sense to you, it's actually an interesting concept. Because the other always relied on the fixed karmic view of things. So if you did something, then it would come back to you, no matter what, right? But the Buddha said, no, it's modulated. So all your actions are modulated. It means that right now, in this kind of experience, there's a specific transformation that's happening that is changing the flow of your karmic formations. That's pretty cool. And if you stayed long enough, you could actually, become free of the past, is what he was saying. And not even the karma is, not even what he calls vipaka, even the fruit of the past. That there are certain things, and he spoke of that this is a purification process that we're in here that can change. We change our thinking, we change how we are. We actually change sometimes the direction of where we're going. To me, pretty fabulous. Or it gives me incentive of why I do this. Because I know it can change everything. I'm convinced. I have faith, I have confidence that this is true. And I think that's what you have to have, that kind of confidence on some level. Now, as we go deeper, and I'm going to go now into what they call the subtle characteristics, and they're kind of fun because they are, in a sense, a deeper way of looking at these fundamental characteristics. And the first one is the impermanence. Is that at first we see the solidness of things, and we all intellectually get that it's solid. And we have created all our identities and concepts around the solidness. And then at some point, I was thinking, I shouldn't be saying this, but anyway, I think the first time I took psychedelics, I realized, oh my gosh, this is not what it appears to be, And I went, oh, something else is happening here, but I'm not really, I get it, but I don't get it. And so it's been a process of actually getting that on some level on the what I understood then, but didn't get. And so now it's a process of kind of unpacking that at a much subtler level without the impact. And also I get to remember. Well, sort of. Of going down, and then suddenly that impermanence, that structure that we saw, and we began to get the flow, we start actually, because it's a whole process of questioning, we start beginning to question the things in the flow. And the Buddha simply said, oh, well, when you do that, then there's this word sunyata, that it's actually, he used the word empty or emptiness. And I'll read this. This is a piece from Ajahn Chah, which is his kind of version of it. The Buddha saw that whatever the mind gives rise to are just transitory conditioned phenomena, which are really empty. When this dawned on him, he let go. He gave up, found an end to suffering. You too must understand these matters according to the truth. When you know things are as they are, you will see that these elements of mind are a deception. In keeping with the Buddha's teachings that this mind has nothing, does not arise, is not born, does not die with anyone. It is free, shining, with nothing to occupy it. The mind becomes occupied only because it misunderstands and is deluded by these conditioned phenomena, this false sense of self. Therefore, the Buddha has us look at our minds. What exists in the beginning? Truly, not anything. This emptiness does not arise and die with phenomena. When contacting something good, it does not become good. When it contacts something bad, it does not become bad. The pure mind knows these objects clearly, knows that they are not substantial. So, when we begin to investigate that flow, we also recognize that the objects in the self, all of it in it, is substancelessness. I mean, is that really a word? But it sounds good. Substancelessness. And but it is at this point then, we can't just say that, okay, we've been sitting and we begin to get the kind of somatic reality of the flow of time, the flow of the objects of awareness. Now, the objects of awareness. So the objects of awareness, the awareness itself, that's another story. We'll get to that. But the objects of awareness are five senses and our thoughts. What do we know about them? Wow, they are just, they're nuts. They're just, there's never a point where you ever actually do anything but make contact with them. And what do? You can't make contact with the same moment ever again, or the same sense. So not even the things that get so solid in the body that we think, oh my gosh, I have this pain, it's really solid. And boy, is it real. But if we truly go and investigate it, it can't be that. It's not that. It actually is part of that impermanence. And then, what is it? Only in relationship to other things. So then it goes back to two nights ago. I used this word potential for emptiness. That in the stream or the flow of things, there's this awareness that every object or everything that's arising, if it's substancelessness, it has no core, then, but it has the potential to be anything, because everything here is arising out of the potential. But it's not anything more than the potential. So what's that do? Okay, so the impermanence actually goes down to this coreless, the objects themselves. Are nothing to get attached to. They only have one true nature. They arise and they disappear. That's their only nature. And that is an intelligence. That's a phenomenal intelligence. It's not a thinking thing. It's a gut. It's at the gut level of not holding anything too dearly, because it's impermanent and it's kind of, it's the potential for everything, but it's not really anything. And the problem with that somewhat is they say that it's easy to go into nihilism in that. Okay? And it's probably this word, the emptiness, it sort of says no to the universe. That's kind of the problem. No. It doesn't, isn't anything. There can be a danger, because it is then I don't want to be part of this. So I think there's a kind of we have to be careful of a denial there. Now there's suffering, which is the second line. And the suffering, first of all, on the surface, is a drag. Okay, it just, it really, it's a, the mashed potatoes cruncher, and it just crunches up things and people, and it just eats people up, and yet it has this letting go that has to happen in the crunching, if that makes sense to you. It's like you can't just die in the suffering; that there has to be an effect, right? And that effect, now how long you hold on, I don't know about all that, There's some pretty stubborn people around, and there are also some very unaware people who repeat the same, thinking they'll get a different result. How's that one? You know that one? You do the same thing and, you suffer for it, but you think you'll get a different result, Wow. So we began to see that the letting go is really there. And it's so interesting, because as that friction and that letting go, and it gets subtler, and we think, oh, we get more sensitive to how all this works, and And I sit here, and even the breath, I can feel the as I'm breathing. I mean, this has happened to me where you're breathing, and you're so sensitive, and just the warmth of the breath and the cold of just the air is painful. Wow. And that kind of subtlety, then actually in its depth, that letting go that happens around it, that you can't hold it so much. There's an interesting phenomena there. Because because of the suffering, we can't change what is happening. And there's an awareness of not being able to change what happens. So there's the letting go, but you can't change what's happening. So you're breathing, you're alive, you've got it. So it's cold, it comes in, and it's really intense. And so what is it that happens there is that as you begin to feel that, and there's the process of the friction and the recognition there's nothing you can do about it, they use the word tata. Now, it's such a beautiful word because it actually, the tata, it translates as suchness. And so you see that as the Buddha is actually he who is suchness. That's actually the translation. The Tathagata is the one who is suchness. Wow. But suchness doesn't say, the impermanent flow, it doesn't say it's not in the negative. It says this is the way it is. Right? So it actually says, the suchness actually is saying yes to the universe. And it's interesting because it comes through the line not of impermanent, but it comes through the recognition of the suffering. And suddenly we are in contact with saying, here's this relative world where the awareness makes contact with things. We know its nature.
So it's like a bare experience, right?
We know the bare experience, and we know that if there's attachment to it, guess what? But if there's no attachment to it, and it's free, wow. It is just what it is. It's the suchness of things. And what happens in the suchness is that there are three fundamental awarenesses that can arise out of that. And the first one is just seen as when the mind no longer is grasping. Therefore, it doesn't suffer. Okay? It begins to, in the suchness, they say you see the vividness or the radiance or the luminosity in the contact itself. So the awareness is there, and then there's these senses. Now the senses in confusion is grasping, and therefore suffering. Okay? But the senses, when there isn't the grasping, there is the suchness, or this vividness, or this luminosity, or this radiance that is actually part of being here. Wow. How's that? It's so cool. So when you're not grasping, then the heightened senses are, it's a remarkable, mysterious phenomena called life. Wow. You say yes to this. This is okay. Not saying no, it's saying yes. And he called it the middle way. So you're not going to get one or the other. Sorry, but that vividness and the kind of luminosity when the mind is clear and open is phenomenal. There's also a recognition in the suffering, in the non-grasping, that they use the word spaciousness. And I see it as like when that the mind, when that vividness there is the senses recognize the kind of the radiance of things and the brilliance and the luminosity of things. when that suchness is part of the really the heart, when there's no longer a grasping of the heart, then there's tremendous space. You can drip wax on things. Hold. It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. We can hold tremendous amounts of space. It's which means that we can include a chaotic world. Okay, here's the secret. You can include a chaotic world. So we live in a very sensitive base, and it's where we're trying to come down to very subtle things. But it says you can be in the Benares train station or Calcutta and be in the chaos, and there can be the spaciousness, and you're seeing people dying and being born, and people throwing up, and people hugging, and you can see it all because you have the space to do that, because then there's not the clinging. So there is actually, the heart is open to hold more. And that doesn't just mean a train station. That also means individual, one-on-one person. So one is holding not just the individual; they hold the whole room. So, and this is a really wonderful, by the way, helpful thing for people working one-on-one with people, where you actually hold the room instead of the individual in some ways. So you've just created more space. If the heart is open, it's there. It's holding it all. And then the third level of the suchness, which I like, has to do with the body. And when the body is not fighting itself, when you're not trying to, it's so complicated because, again, body's a difficult thing. But there's this process of wanting, where we have a discomfort and we want to fix it. And we do all sorts of crazy kind of mental gymnastics. We find all sorts of avoidance techniques or whatever, But also, when the awareness in the body make contact, even when it's strong, when there's strong discomfort, when that suchness is there, which is below the dukkha, so there's not a grasping that's there. What's there? And they use the word ease. So there's actually a sense of relaxedness or ease that's available any place along the way. But if grasping is there, but I'm talking about when you get below it, below any kind of attachment or grasping, then there is a natural ease that rests in that yes and suchness. And I'm not saying you're always going to get there or whatever. I'm just saying because we have to be so informed by the dukkha, by the way, that and we have to teach ourselves. And what we're doing here is a minimal training on. This is a setup. If you don't have dukkha, just come and tell me. We'll make some up here. I'm not into it too much. I figure you got a pretty good recognition of it, But there's some schools, in the Rinzai Zen school. I was thinking of Sasaki, Sasaki Roshi. He's 103 years old, and you go up on Mount Baldy and you walk in the snow. You get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You run in to have this little 1 minute interview, and you run out again, and you're told figure out the one hand clapping what that sound is or something, or does a dog have Buddha nature? Something totally ridiculous, because it's supposed to break your mind, But, I have confidence you will break your own.
We're too intellectual anyway.
You make up your own, you bring them in, you got your own koans. I'm not too worried about that, And eventually you get to where you begin to see that, the object of who I think I am, that I arise due to the causes and conditions. So sometimes I'm there and sometimes I'm not there. But whenever I'm there, guess what? I notice that there's some clinging, right? And that identity, I see causes the suffering. And yet, the relative world, I have to have it too. And I'm not saying I'm talking now on the this progress of insight. So I'm very sure that I'm John and I'm a neurotic and I get in trouble all the time. And that's just part of the living thing, okay? But there's also the fact that when I'm not interfering with the suchness, I'm just present for it, that I can see I made the whole thing up, including myself. And then there's a process of breaking that down. And that process of breaking it down is where the mind turns around on itself and begins to ask itself, what is it that's aware? What is awareness itself? Is awareness, is it connected to the objects? So the I, is it just to the thoughts? Is it connected just to the senses and its experience? Is that what it is? And so there actually has to be this inquiry that happens. And that inquiry is first to realize that it's what they call the kind of a dualistic world. That there is what I perceive, the awareness itself, and then there is all the objects of awareness. And what arises simultaneous in that is the identity. And so one sees that, and one realizes the suffering in it, and it's it's impermanent, and that every time you break it all down in the deconstruction process, you come out and see that it's not anything, and that it's still there. It is suchness. It is not there, and it's there. And you kind of go, God, now I'm really confused. And you play with this, and at some point, you kind of get tired of messing with it, trying to figure it out, and trying to look at it from all these different angles, and it's like a hall of mirrors. And you just keep dancing around the hall of mirrors, always re-identifying yourself with a different mask on. Great. But eventually you do have to tire of that. And you tire of that, and then they say the mind has to turn around and start looking at the awareness itself. And the awareness itself, is non-dual. It's not actually split off. And that it's naturally at rest. It's only the objects that disturb it. And so this word, atamayata, not there with the object. Okay? Whether it's the object of self or object of seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, body sensations. Not with that. So you begin then to not buy the show. But you realize that that's aware has always been there. And as Ajahn Chah puts it, where was it? When you know things are as they are, you will see that these elements of mind are a deception, in keeping with the Buddha's teachings that this mind has nothing, does not arise, is not born, and does not die with anyone. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, what is it that knows? And can you begin to relax enough and rest and turn the mind around on itself to say, I am, in a way you can say, and this is in the relative language, I am that. Nothing to be born, nothing to die. No. Because there's no yesterday and there's no tomorrow. Can't be. There can only be that here. And if it lets go of what's the objects, then it's just this. Awake. Just awake. So I'll finish with my poem here. The world calling from a well gone dry. From this silence so well constructed, I wander off into tomorrow, bending like a willow, trying to touch a world unhatched. This impossible of my imagination. I am the intimacy of faith. I am the grandeur of loneliness. I am the worthiness, that which is kept buried beneath the wounds of my stories. Sometimes everything has to be studied, knowing somehow the sitting here is not enough. This knowing the fierce walking like pilgrims through the darkness, knowing we've traveled inside everyone, feeling the grief, the joys. I want to know no more traveling on the wings of fear and hope, but sit by the fire of living, no longer dying to what could have been or even what will be, but finding my place in the things that are. Some mystery presented, some grace, some bit of mercy miraculously lived. So let this listening, somewhere beneath the granite shelves of the earth, where the sweet waters lie in wait, to be tapped to give life back to itself. This basic goodness, this first step home, gives you back to yourself, this heart flowing with each encounter, a mind pliable, moving like the sweet stream from that deep down listening. I am awake. As the world calls in its pungent need to change me, I move into it, with it.